Thanks for joining us today for our special series on the future of transportation and the effects of the pandemic on how we travel. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief of Business in Vancouver. Good to have you with us. My guest today has stepped into a leadership role at a very challenging time. The Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, ICBC, has been a highly scrutinized operation in this government's term, and the arrival of COVID-19 hasn't made matters any easier. Nicolas Jimenez is the CEO with the task of shepherding the corporation through some significant changes. I'm delighted you can join us. Good to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I thought that maybe becoming a publisher of BIV this year is a huge task considering COVID. You stepped into quite a job there.
Well, I did. I mean, it's been 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
But it's been 2.5 years of the most intense and consistent effort at change, I think, in the company's 47-year history. So I would say we're pretty tired over here. A lot of work to do.
There is still a lot of work to do. Largely speaking, what has been the tone that you've tried to effect here with your leadership group and into the organization? Given that you seem to have a kind of an intense scrutiny on the part of the provincial government, but then it doubles up, doesn't it? Doubles down, if you want to call it that, with COVID. What's the style that you've tried to present?
Well, I mean, we've tried to come across recognizing where we're at, which is the company has had a series of problems. We can debate how we got here, but we're here. And so rather than get fussed about looking backwards, we've said, look, we've just got to get down to fixing the problems. And so we've tried to bring in humility. We've tried to bring in authenticity. We've tried to bring in a sort of a humble approach, which is we really need to bed down these problems and move on. I mean, my perfect vision for the future is we get to a place where we don't talk about auto insurance anymore.
Right.
Where the conversations we have are the ones we want to have with our customers, either when we're selling a product or when we're servicing, the product because someone's got into a crash. That's what we should be focused on, and that's kind of the if you will, the the substantive tone that we've tried to bring in our interactions, certainly in the last couple of years, anyway.
Yeah, and it would strike me that you're quite correct. You needed to change that channel in order to give people a bit of a sense of it. But when the pandemic came, and all of a sudden people were reconsidering how it is that they travel, what kind of new wave of challenge did that bring to you and to your plans?
Well, I mean, I guess we had two ways of looking at that. I mean, the first is to deal with what you have in front of you, which is you have an entirely different set of circumstances in terms of your daily business. And how do you respond to what's going on in people's lives? People are losing their jobs. They're seeing incomes, in some cases cut 20, 30, 40, 50%. Their patterns of travel, mobility completely changed. And so we need to respond to that. But then you're responding in the context of dealing with your own human challenge with your workforce, who are going through the very same things that other people are, with kids at home and, concerns for elder parents who they might be living with. So, the challenge that we had to do was, what can we do in our business to make things easier for people in this particular moment? And that was looking at flexibility and adapting the business as quickly as we can. And we did a bunch of different, very kind of immediate and tactical things. So one is we work with brokers and others to say, we can't physically have customers come to your office. Let's make sure that we can do this over the phone. So in 48 hours, we changed our distribution model.
Yeah, all that bricks and mortar, right? All that bricks and mortar suddenly.
Yeah. Overnight, which is unheard of in our driver licensing business. I mean, if you think about, not just the office part of it, but the actual vehicle part of it, we're doing road tests. So we had to suspend, the road test for a period of time until we could figure out how to do that safely. In the repair business, we have people putting their cars into the mix, and so we had to make sure that there were cleaning protocols put in place. We had customers who were going through financial challenges, so we had to figure out ways to accommodate people who just couldn't make their next monthly payment. So we had to adapt, a payment deferral plan, and looking at some of the fees attached to, reinsuring your vehicle after you've either canceled it or decided not to renew your insurance. So there's a whole bunch of things where we had to bring flexibility and responsiveness, and we had to do it like every other business in 2 weeks or less.
Yeah, you recite these as if they are deeply committed to memory.
There's a dozen others which I won't even get into, but yeah, they are.
Yeah.
But we feel pretty passionate about it because it's real. I mean, it's real for everybody. I mean, even employees at ICBC, who are now working at home, their driving patterns have changed. Well, I'd give them the same advice. You should look and talk to your broker and change your insurance policy because your needs have changed.
So how do you think things have already changed, Nicholas?
In terms of the company, or more just globally?
No, I think let's talk about travel, about ground transportation right now.
Well,
what you're starting to notice?
Well, I mean, we're like a lot of other organizations, very closely monitoring mobility trends, and so we're using all available data to kind of see what's happening in the environment. And what we know is we hit a cliff in March and April, and even the early part of May. The bottom fell out, and our volumes dropped probably between 50 and 60% in terms of what we're seeing in claims, which is, there's no model for that, unheard of. But since the beginning to middle of May, we've begun to see that come back up. Now we're still down year over year, probably in the 20 to 25% range. But we've seen a massive change. People are driving more. They're getting around more. They're working more. And this is consistent with the provincial restart. We even monitor where we use, some of the Google stats that are available, publicly in terms of where people are traveling. Well, they're not traveling to downtown cores and for work, but they are traveling more in their home neighborhood and to parks and other places. So these kinds of shifts have already started to occur. We're seeing people renew their insurance. We had a huge number of people cancel their insurance in the latter half of March.
Just saying, I'm not going to be driving for a while.
Just saying, our cancellations went up in some cases 60% week over week from prior year. That's normalized again. But for about a month and a half, we had a huge number of people cancel their policies. Well, that's starting to come back. So people are putting insurance back on policies they canceled. And that's a sure sign that things have changed in the economy. Now, it hasn't restored itself, but it's changed.
No, but you point to an interesting thing around, and I'm always fascinated with traffic. I love studying it. But the point that some people are not driving any longer or as much into the downtown cores. So does that necessarily mean then that we're driving, first of all, a little more slowly, less kind of haste, less impulse? We're not rushing from one place to another in quite the same way. Might that mean that for the foreseeable future, for the next number of weeks and months anyway, that we're a little less accident prone? What do you think?
I would say it's too early to make that observation. So what a number of auto insurers around the country have been watching is, with fewer people on the roads, the natural inclination is to drive faster. And so insurance companies, carriers, have been worried about severities, the cost of those crashes going up because they're more severe collisions because people are driving faster. So we've been monitoring that. Haven't necessarily seen that, but what we have seen is that there's more weekend crashes, and that's not an observable change that is going to be with us for the foreseeable future. But there's our feeling is that there seems to be more traffic or more movement on the weekend, where in a normal pre-pandemic period you would have seen the bulk of driving occur during the week, and then a slower pattern of behavior on the weekends. So it is shifting a little bit. Congestion's down, so you can measure through the mobility stats. There is less congestion on the roads, and that's true for both midweek and weekends. But people I wouldn't say are driving more slowly. That's certainly not something we've seen.
And what about the idea that and I'll feel this all the time. If I haven't driven for a week, first few hundred meters, it's a new thing again. I mean, is that also playing into it, where you're seeing more weekend incidents because maybe people aren't driving during the week the way they commonly do?
I mean, it's possible. I think it's pretty hard to get that sense from the data. You'd need to really do something more qualitative and talk to people and try to glean into their mindsets about how they feel when they're driving. Now, what is true, and you've probably seen the same statistics that I have, is that as a population, whether that's BC, Canada, or writ large, we're more anxious. The feelings of uncertainty are definitely there. So does that play out into how you drive? Are you more distracted? Those are things that I think we need to pay attention to. We do workforce surveys, just like I'm sure you've seen other employers do, and people are self-identifying as being, a little bit feeling less comfortable about everything, whether
Sure.
it's working, life, generally.
Yeah, I mean, there clearly people have job worries, they have family worries, they have, of course, health worries for their extended families and friends. Those types of things do prey on you as you're driving, no matter that you try to keep a clear mind, right?
Absolutely. And whether there's 3 people on the road or 30 people on the road, I mean, if you're distracted, you're distracted.
Yeah.
And if you have an overlay that's making everything more complicated, well, that's going to eventually show up in some kind of statistic.
Yeah. So the province has, I think, given some fairly clear direction about where it wants ICBC to go over the longer haul. I think that it's certainly, our Attorney General has been very outspoken about its history and would like to have certain things dealt with. One of the areas that I think that consumers really, of course, always worry about is that if they're in some kind of a serious crash, that they're looked after. They're looked after properly, and of course, we have a whole sector of personal injury lawyers that have circulated through all of this in order to try to make this all work. We're moving out of that, and we're moving into some other kind of extended care approach. What were the principles that you felt needed to be there in order, just as a leader, to be able to authentically speak to the issue of having this backstop for people who find themselves in longer term needs as a result of accidents?
Well, I mean, for us, the system we're moving to, I believe is infinitely better than the one we're in, and mostly because, for 2 reasons. One is going to cost less, so everyone's going to see, that impact right away, which is good news. But the more important part of it is the focus isn't necessarily on defending, a customer who's being sued by another customer who wasn't at fault, and where the locus of your effort is on litigation, not on recovery, but investing all of your time, all of your energy, all of your money on the recovery of an injured person. And everybody gets treated the same. In our current world, you get treated differently by virtue of the fact that you're either an at fault or not at fault customer, because you have a different set of circumstances. In the new world, everybody has the right to get the same benefits, and those benefits are greatly increased. And so what we're building in the company is basically a team, a unit that's going to kind of expand the one that we've currently got, that's only focused on working with people who are injured and need to either get back to life, back to function, back to work. That's a different muscle to pull on than the one that we currently pull on. But that's one that I think was going to serve everybody better. Whether it's customers who are going to experience the recovery process differently, or whether it's employees who don't have to go through very difficult, timely, and costly litigation, but can now put all of their time and thought and emotional investment into your recovery. And I think that's just going to work better for everybody.
And yet, I'm sure you had heard coming into the job, and have heard it all the way through since, that one of the real concerns that people have had is that if there isn't this legal capacity, that then they're at the mercy of a government institution or like that to do it. And so how do you make sure that people are in fact reassured that this is going to be better? This is not a takeaway on their part. It's not a budgetary issue that is driving the process type of thing.
I mean, there's a bunch of ways to kind of build confidence in a new system. One, it's in the legislation.
Yeah.
Our primary obligation is to make sure you get the benefits you're entitled to. Two, it's to put medical decisions in the hands of medical professionals. So it's to make sure that a recovery plan is designed by a doctor, not an insurance recovery specialist. And then, where there are points of differences, and there will be. I mean, there will be things that people want to have as part of the recovery that aren't evidence-based and aren't supported by either a care provider, treatment provider like a physio or chiro, or even your own GP, to make sure that there's avenues for people to say, hey, I'd like someone else to take a look at this. I don't agree with the assessment that's been made. And to have that very clear for people throughout the journey of their recovery, and then have layers to that, so you can ultimately keep your concerns going if you feel like, well, the advice I got from this independent doctor, I don't agree with. Okay, fine. There's a fairness office. You should put your concerns to them, independent, outside of ICBC, reporting to our board. Make your case. So these kinds of things will exist to give kind of a lot of light onto the process, to how decisions are being made. I think one of the things that we've heard from people in terms of their frustrations with our insurance system is that, they don't feel like they understand it very well. So why are rates the way they are? Why do they keep going up? They feel like there's not transparency. And we have thousands of pages that go to a utilities commission. Nobody reads that stuff, and I wouldn't expect them to. So it's to make sure that we do more upfront to help people understand the journey. What you're going to experience, how you're going to experience it, where you can get off the ramp if you don't like it, and who you can bring in if you feel like you need additional help.
Yeah. Well, help me with this one here. What do you think are the top couple of myths that people have about insurance in this province?
Well, I think the one is that somehow that the cost that they're paying for their premiums doesn't reflect the cost of the system. That somebody's benefiting from these high rates, and it's not, and it's outside of the insurance kind of ecosystem, and that's just not the case. We know that the prices we charge reflect the costs of settling the claim. I think another myth is that ICBC people generally get terrible service at ICBC. Now, I will admit the perception of our brand is not very strong, but our customer experience data, which is more than just high-level satisfaction, it goes much, much richer than that, it is very strong and has been for a long time. So people who interact with us generally have a pretty good experience. But what they read in an article or through a social media feed might be different than the experience they felt. They're more inclined to believe, or anchor to that perception, even if their experience with ICBC has been pretty good.
Well, I mean, I believe they should believe the media, but I mean, that's an entirely different discussion. Now, I guess what I want to look at are the years ahead, because what's apparent already is that people have a kind of a new apprehension about the public transit system. And we don't know how long that'll last. Maybe that's going to take until we have a vaccine and we've cleared the pandemic out of our way. But who knows? Maybe people are going to reshape their behaviors all over again. And it likely means that they're out, in some cases, buying vehicles, new ones, used ones, whatever. So potentially, you might have more vehicles on the road, whether they're being driven as much as a whole other matter.
Yeah.
So what kind of planning scenarios are you beginning to look at in terms of this potential shift here?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. The things that we're building in different scenario models that have short and long-term timelines, and they're built on different assumptions about what we think could or couldn't happen in terms of policy growth, in terms of the types of vehicles in our policy universe, in terms of movement, etc. And so, in as much as you're describing, if people are more skittish about taking transit, I don't think that's long term. I think that's probably a short term phenomena. And will they be inclined to purchase vehicles? I'm not sure, but they might be inclined to drive the vehicle they have more often. Now, that's offset, though, by the fact that most people today are spending some or all of their time working from home. So the need for, if you were, a family where both partners work and needed vehicles for travel, or one took public transit and the other did, the reality is your needs have changed pretty substantially. I think about our own workforce. Like many others, within about 2 weeks, we sent over 50% of our people home. Another 25% working kind of a little bit of a hybrid model at home and at work. Our future, pandemic, notwithstanding, is to have more people work at home for a good chunk of the time. We actually think, not all the time, but we think, a portion of the time that works better for people, builds more flexibility. So those are longer term assumptions that we might make around what's going to happen. So you have to kind of blend the short and the long term. But the biggest problem we have with any scenario planning, beyond the fact that all scenarios are going to be wrong, in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, no one's been.
They have to adapt
because
we're kind of learning through this pandemic. What we knew in April is very different than what we knew in June, and what we're seeing in August is very different than what we saw in June. So we're going through almost a monthly iteration of our models to kind of just keep it fresh.
Sure. I think 5 years ago, I was asking the question that I thought would be by now solved, which is when are we going to see autonomous vehicles on our roads? Right. Obviously, that discussion seems to have stalled in the last number of months, but
well, it's before that. In fact, that stalled about a year and a half ago.
Yeah. What's the projection that you feel is sane about that one?
I've always felt that has a longer term horizon than the optimists wanted everyone to believe, and this would be most notably the OEMs, the car manufacturers. They were very bullish on their ability to convert all of their fleet onto these platforms once they solve the technical challenges. Well, it turns out the technical challenges are pretty hard to solve. And there's more of a shift now, more energy, more capital being plowed into electric vehicles. Now, that's not to say that people aren't working on AVs and getting that technology right. I think it's got a 5 to 10 year horizon before we see a noticeable portion of autonomous vehicles saturate our vehicle population. And then a longer term, even beyond that, before we see a big part of our fleet turnover. So we're not seeing that as a 0 to 5 year kind of phenomena.
Is and again, the rise of the electric vehicle is now starting to basically have some great evidence about it, particularly in a city like this one here in Vancouver, where you really see there's so many more charging stations and obviously availability, and there's some high income to deal with some of the cost of these vehicles. Again, how might insurance adapt around that? Because these are at times either pricey cars to fix, or in some cases they're almost write-offs when they do go into crashes because of the scarcity of a lot of the component elements of them locally.
Well, I mean, you're unfortunately already seeing the impact of, and it's not just EVs, but it's other newer model year cars with loads of really good but ultimately expensive safety features, the advanced driver, assistance type stuff. That is you'll see in our numbers that the severity costs, the cost of the vehicle repairs, they're going up. So even while frequency, the number of crashes is going down, the cost to repair vehicles is going up fairly steadily. And that's true in most jurisdictions, not just BC. And that is only going to get more intense as a lot of that older sort of portion of the fleet turns over and people start moving into newer model years. Especially true for EVs. I mean, you've heard the horror stories around trying to repair Teslas because of parts availability. It's very challenging. That's not always the case, but sometimes it is. I think if you talk to anyone who's in the glass repair business, they will tell you what used to be a very simple and relatively inexpensive job is turned into a very complicated task because of all the sensors that have to be recalibrated.
Yeah.
When you're fixing what should just be what you would think is a pretty simple thing, which is a window shield. Well,
even tires are also becoming much more complex.
Absolutely. Everything.
Yeah. Okay, so I should ask a couple of personal questions here because I know you're a mountain climber and all that. How have you taken care of yourself here during all of this?
That's a good question. I mean, I've tried to stay fit. I've tried to stay as active as possible. For me, going into the mountains is absolutely the thing that restores me. I'm only truly relaxed when I'm tired. After slogging it up, whether you're backcountry skiing or hauling yourself up to an alpine environment.
Don't you think you get one of those like big 4x4s and at least get yourself a couple of thousand feet up there? And
I have one of those, but it's still a long way. Yeah. Certainly in the Coast Range. So trying to do more with the kids, I think, has been certainly the beginning too, when everything sort of seemed to sort of close in on itself. We were spending a lot of time doing things we'd never done before. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit, but we hadn't really taken the kids around the neighborhood. So, their lives existed in this bubble between school and home and whatever activity they were doing. Well, with activities virtually shut down, we spent a lot of time getting on the bikes, just driving around or riding around the neighborhood, so they could actually see where they live. And again, they're 10 or 11 now. I'm embarrassed to say it took a pandemic for us to kind of, explore our hood, but that's kind of the way life has been.
Yeah. Well, maybe an adjunct question to that though is that it's true. Many neighborhoods are changing quite quickly in terms of their adaptation around fewer cars, fewer vehicles on the road, and they're becoming a lot more pedestrian friendly and cycling friendly. Do you think much of that's going to stick?
I think it's hard to know. I want to believe the best parts of what we've become are the things we hang on to. But I also know old habits die hard. So I'm hoping personally to retain some of the changes that we've made and in our lives that I think are for the better. And that in a year or two or three, when we kind of get back to different patterns of either travel or work or whatever, we don't lose all that. I think the stories yet to be written on that. So I'm going to reserve judgment to make a prediction because I can't do anything other than what I think I'm going to do, which I hope is the right stuff.
I thought if you climb mountains, you would be fearless around that one, but that's okay. That's fine. We'll take that as.
You know what it is? I just don't know, and we have the same challenge in our own understanding of consumer behavior. And I've had a hard time finding literature that really provides an accurate model for, how are consumers going to permanently change through all of this, and lots of conjecture, but very few people have been able to, in my view, kind of lay it out clearly because they have a model that tells us that's the way it's going to be.
Well, the one thing that I think we can safely predict is that in as much as some people have said this is now the time that we're all going to turn to cycling, that we're all going to start walking our neighborhoods and be fitter and all that, the car is still going to prevail for a long time.
Yeah, we've always said, even with autonomous vehicles, and even if that changes the way people own vehicles, more kilometers are going to be driven in 10 years than today. Full stop. There'll be more tires on more roads, taking more people to more, to more distances traveled. So I don't disagree. Although you try to get your bike repaired now at a bike store, I'll tell you, you're going to wait 2 or 3 weeks because that's a business that's done very well in the last 3 to 4 months.
Maybe ICBC should get into bicycle repair. Right?
Maybe.
Yeah. Nicolas, it's been good talking to you. Thanks so much for your
Thanks, Kirk. Appreciate it. I've enjoyed it.
Nicolas Jimenez is the CEO of ICBC. You've been watching our special series on transportation and the pandemic. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief of Business in Vancouver. Thanks for joining us.